Pedro was a 10-year-old boy living in a low-income neighborhood, where the streets were made of dirt and the houses were mostly simple and modest. He woke up every day before the sun rose, to the sound of birds singing and the smell of fresh coffee that his mother, Maria, was preparing. The first thing he did upon opening his eyes was look at the worn ceiling of the small room he shared with his younger sister, Ana. Despite the difficult conditions, Pedro always carried a sparkle in his eyes, a hope that made him believe he could change his reality. That day, like many others, Pedro left home with the determination to help his neighbors. With a smile on his face, he headed to the house of Dona Lourdes, an elderly lady who lived alone and often needed assistance. "Good morning, Dona Lourdes. Can I help with the groceries?" he asked, already offering to carry the heavy bags. The lady smiled, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and affection. "Ah, my dear Pedro, you are an angel. I don't know what I would do without you," she replied as he took the bags and walked beside her, listening to stories from her youth that fascinated him. While helping Dona Lourdes, Pedro couldn't help but notice the daily struggle of his own mother. Maria, a strong and hardworking woman, spent hours in a small beauty salon, where she attended clients and tried to earn enough money to support the family. "Mom, are you okay?" Pedro asked as he saw her come home, her face tired and her hands full of creams and brushes. Maria smiled, but her eyes revealed the weight of her worries. "I'm fine, son. Just a little tired. But today is payday, and that always brings some relief," she replied, trying to keep the faith. Pedro looked at her, admiring her strength, but also feeling a pang of sadness as he realized the difficulties his mother faced. As night fell, Pedro joined some friends in the street to play ball. While kicking the worn ball, he shared his dreams with the other boys. "One day I'm going to be a scientist. I'm going to invent something that helps people," he said enthusiastically. The friends laughed and made jokes, but Pedro didn't care. "Seriously, guys. I want to change the world. Look around us, we need change," he exclaimed, gesturing with his hands. One of his friends, Lucas, looked at him and said, "But how are you going to do that? No one here has money to study, Pedro." Pedro paused for a moment, thoughtful. "I know it's hard, but if we don't dream, nothing is going to change, and I'm going to dream big," he asserted, determination written on his face. On his way back home, as he walked under the moonlight, Pedro felt a mix of hope and anxiety. He knew that life wasn't easy, but his determination was greater than the obstacles. As he crossed the threshold of his house, he looked at his mother, who was now watching television. Her expression relaxed. "Mom, I'm going to make it. One day we're going to have a better life," he promised, convinced that, with effort and courage, he could turn his dreams into reality. Maria looked at him and smiled. But in her heart, a shadow of worry remained. After all, how could she protect her son from the challenges of life that she herself knew so well? Rafaela Benitez had a generous heart, but living amidst luxury and success had made it difficult for her to remember the struggles that life imposed on many. On that sunny morning, while driving her car through the outskirts, the businesswoman decided it was time to reconnect with her roots. She was searching for a new social project that could truly make a difference. As she passed through the narrow and poorly cared-for streets of the neighborhood, her attention was drawn to a scene that made her stop. There, in front of a small, worn-down building, a 10-year-old boy, Pedro, was helping an elderly lady carry heavy bags. The sun reflected off his sweaty face, but he was smiling, and the way he treated the woman with respect and patience warmed Rafaela's heart. She stood watching, not caring about the time that passed. The way Pedro moved, the way he interacted with the lady, showed that there was something special there. With a smile, Rafaela got out of the car and approached. "Hi, are you helping your neighbor?" she asked enthusiastically, making Pedro stop and look at her with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Yes, ma'am. She can't carry everything by herself," Pedro replied, nodding his head as if the answer was the most natural thing in the world. "You're a very kind boy," Rafaela praised, feeling touched by his kindness. "What's your name?" Pedro, he replied, still a bit bewildered by the presence of the well-dressed woman. And what about you? I'm Rafaela. I'm here to learn more about the neighborhood and the people who live here, she said, trying to convey sincerity in her words. Do you have a dream, Pedro? Pedro's eyes sparkled upon hearing the question. I want to be a scientist and help people, he said fervently. But sometimes it's hard. My mom works a lot, and I try to help in any way I can. Those words touched Rafaela deeply. She could feel the boy's determination and hope, even in the face of the difficulties he faced. And what do you think you would need to become a scientist? She asked, interested in learning more about his dreams. I would love to have access to books and a computer, and, who knows, do experiments, Pedro said, his eyes shining. The conversation flowed, and Rafaela felt that she had found not just a boy, but a soul that needed direction. Pedro, would you like to visit me? I have a space where we can study together and do experiments. What do you think? Pedro was silent for a moment, processing what he had just heard. Seriously, I would love to, but my mom. His voice faltered, and the expression on his face changed to a mix of hope and uncertainty. I understand that your mom might be worried, Rafaela said, understanding the boy's hesitation. But I can promise that I will take care of you and that it will be an amazing experience. You deserve to have this chance. Pedro looked at the ground for a moment, struggling with his emotions. I would really like to, but I don't want to leave my mom alone. You don't have to leave your mom. We can talk to her, explain everything. After all, you may have the opportunity to help your family even more in the future, Rafaela suggested with an encouraging smile. After a silence filled with expectations, Pedro raised his eyes and said, Okay, I will talk to her. Rafaela felt a mix of joy and responsibility. Great, let's do this together, Pedro. I'm here to help. With a new spark of hope, Pedro smiled. Thank you, Ms. Rafaela. I promise I will do my best. He seemed more confident now, as if the idea of being welcomed by Rafaela was not just a dream but a real possibility. With a warm hug and a feeling of anticipation in her heart, Rafaela said goodbye to Pedro, knowing that this meeting would mark the beginning of a transformative journey for both of them. Maria was at home, sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. The sunlight was coming through the window, but she saw nothing but the worries that consumed her. Rafaela's proposal had left her unsettled, and the idea of her son, Pedro, living with a stranger tormented her. The phone rang, and even without wanting to, Maria answered. It was Rafaela on the other end, with a cordial but determined tone. Maria, I would like to talk to you, Rafaela started, trying to be diplomatic. I truly believe that Pedro has potential, and that he could benefit greatly from my help. Maria couldn't help the defensive tone in her voice. You don't understand, Rafaela. He is my son. I can't just let him go. And who guarantees that your intentions are pure? Rafaela sighed, realizing the fear behind Maria's words. I understand your concern, but what I'm offering is an opportunity. He needs an environment that encourages him, that helps him grow. I care about him. And am I an unprepared mother? Maria interrupted, her voice trembling. I'm doing the best I can, but that doesn't mean I trust you. What do you really want with this? Silence settled for a moment, heavy and awkward. Rafaela took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. What I want is to help. And if you allow me to get to know Pedro better, maybe we can work together to ensure that he has a better future. Maria closed her eyes, feeling the tears threatening to escape. He already has a future, and I am the only one who can shape it. I won't let you take my son. The conversation ended in a deadlock, and Maria hung up without saying anything more. The tension in the house was palpable. Pedro, who had entered the kitchen quietly, witnessed the scene. He looked at his mother, feeling the weight of the conflict between them. Mom, what happened? Pedro asked, his voice trembling. Nothing you need to worry about, dear, Maria replied, trying to look away. But I heard you talking to Rafaela. She just wants to help me. I want to know more about it. Maria turned, frustration taking over her expression. You don't understand, Pedro. She may not be who she says she is. I can't let you go, not like this. What if something goes wrong? But what if everything goes right? Pedro insisted, feeling a mix of hope and despair. I just want a chance to show that I can do more. Maria, emotionally exhausted, looked at her son. It's not that simple. I'm afraid of what could happen. I don't want you to get hurt. But I'm already hurt. Mom, Pedro replied. His voice choked. I'm tired of being stuck here. I want to be someone and have a chance. The tension between them grew, like a thread about to snap. Maria, consumed by worry, didn't want her son to see her as the villain of the story. But her mind was filled with doubts and memories of her own childhood, when she too had dreamed of having opportunities that never came. In the following days, the situation only worsened. Maria found a sapphire brooch that Rafaela had left at her house during a previous visit. Upon seeing it, a wave of distrust hit her. What if Pedro was stealing, she thought. The idea consumed her, and anger replaced the sadness that had previously dominated her. In a fit of despair, she decided to confront Pedro. I saw the brooch. Pedro, are you stealing things from Rafaela? Pedro was stunned, his expression one of disbelief. Mom, I didn't do any of that. I didn't steal anything. Maria, blinded by anger, didn't want to listen. I can't believe you would do this. Is that what she wants? To turn you into a thief? No, Mom, Pedro shouted, feeling betrayed and misunderstood. You don't trust me. I'm not who you think I am. The atmosphere had become unbearable, and Pedro, not knowing what more to say, decided to leave Rafaela's house. He didn't want to be the cause of his mother's suffering, but he also couldn't stand the idea of living in an environment where he wasn't believed. With a mix of pain and despair, he wrote a note, saying goodbye to everything he had, not knowing what the future held for him. Pedro sat at the table in the new house, observing the polished wood panels and the elegant fixtures that illuminated the space. Rafaela's house was very different from what he was used to, and this brought a mix of happiness and insecurity. He hoped that here he could find a better future, but with each passing day, the feeling of being an intruder grew stronger. At school, the situation was no less difficult. On the first day, he felt the suspicious gazes of his classmates as he walked through the halls. The classroom felt like a hostile place, and every laugh seemed directed at him. A boy with a sarcastic smile shouted, "Hey, you don't belong here," as Pedro tried to settle into his new seat. The words cut like a knife, and Pedro just looked down, trying to hide behind his notebook. He tried not to let it get to him, but the feeling of not being accepted followed him like a shadow. After a few weeks, he worked hard to stand out in his classes and engage in activities. During a science competition, Pedro saw an opportunity to prove his worth. He had spent the previous afternoon putting together a small model of a solar system using recyclable materials he found in the neighborhood. On the day of the competition, his heart raced as the judges walked around, assessing the projects. "Look, there's the new kid," one of the girls whispered as Pedro adjusted his model. "What is he doing here? He has nothing to do with us." Pedro heard but decided to ignore it. He was focused on his presentation. When it was his turn, he took a deep breath and approached the table. "Good morning. My name is Pedro, and today I'm going to talk about our solar system." As he presented, his passion for the subject shone through. He explained the orbits of the planets and the importance of the sun for life on Earth. And slowly, he began to notice that the mocking looks were turning into genuine attention. In the end, one of the judges, a science teacher, smiled and asked, "And you, Pedro, how do you feel about being the new kid in school?" "It's hard," Pedro replied, sensing the sincerity of the question. "But I just want to show that I can be part of this. I want to learn and help." The teacher nodded, visibly impressed. Still, even after the competition, the bullying persisted. A group of students continued to make mean comments, and Pedro felt increasingly isolated. On a particularly tough day, he was sitting alone in the cafeteria when he saw one of the boys approach. "Listen, you don't belong here. Go away and leave us alone." Pedro's heart sank, but before he could respond, a classmate he had met at the competition stood up. "Stop it. Pedro won first place in the science competition. He deserves our respect." The boy's words echoed in the room, and for a brief moment, silence filled the space. Pedro looked at his classmate, surprised and grateful. "Thank you," he murmured as the other students began to disperse, some still muttering but with less confidence. In the following days, Pedro started to form bonds with those who accepted him. He joined a science club and gradually began to feel more at ease. But doubt still lingered over him. Even with new friends, the feeling of being an intruder did not completely disappear. He continued to wonder if he really deserved to be there, at Rafaela's house, and if he could earn his place. In a conversation with Rafaela, while she was helping Pedro with a school project, he opened up. "Rafaela, do you think I really belong here? Sometimes I feel like I'm just a burden." Rafaela paused for a moment, looking into his eyes. "Pedro, you are not a burden. You are special and have incredible potential. Don't let others make you feel different. You are stronger than you think." Her words comforted him, but the internal struggle continued. Pedro wanted to believe he could fit in, but with each new day, the shadow of the past and doubts about his worth felt heavier. During a visit to Rafaela's home, Maria felt uneasy. The large residence, filled with elegant furniture and artwork, starkly contrasted with the reality of her neighborhood. Looking at the luxurious details, she couldn't help but think of the difficulties she faced to support the home she shared with Pedro. As Rafaela animatedly talked about her plans for her son's future, Maria felt increasingly out of place. It was then that, while passing through the hallway, Maria noticed a peculiar shine on one of the tables. Curiously, she approached and saw a sapphire brooch sparkling under the light. The object was exquisite and beautiful, but something inside her twisted. An old memory, from when her mother had told her about lost jewelry and thefts, overwhelmed her. She remembered stories of people who were wrongfully accused but, in their desperation, ended up committing unthinkable acts. Maria turned abruptly, looking for Pedro, who was in the next room talking to Rafaela. The boy's smile, which lit up his face, disappeared when she entered the room with a troubled expression. "Pedro," she called, her voice firm and filled with reproach. He turned unconfused. "Mom, what is it?" Pedro asked, a bit apprehensive. "I saw what's on the table," Maria said, pointing to the brooch. "It's yours, isn't it? You stole it from Rafaela." The accusation shot from her lips like a bullet. The silence that followed was deafening. Rafaela looked at Maria, surprised and offended. "Maria, how can you think that?" She tried to keep calm, but her voice trembled. "Pedro would never do something like that. You don't understand. He's a street kid, Rafaela. He might have done this to get something." Maria spoke fervently, her mind consumed by fear and insecurity. Maria's words cut like a knife. Pedro felt his stomach churn. How could his mother think he was capable of stealing? "Mom, I didn't do anything." He tried to defend himself, but the pain in his voice was evident. "Don't come at me with that. You let yourself get carried away by this life." Maria continued, her voice rising in pitch as tears began to slide down her face. "I just want to protect you. I can't let you become a victim of this world." "But I'm not a victim," Pedro shouted, frustration overflowing. "I'm trying to change my life. Rafaela helped me, Amar, and you can't just..." "Help? You think this is help?" Maria interrupted, gesturing towards Rafaela, who was silent, watching the scene unfold. "You don't know who she is. And now you're there, surrounded by things that aren't yours. How can I trust you?" Rafaela, feeling the tension intensify, tried to intervene. "Maria, I'm here to help Pedro, not to harm him. He's an amazing boy, and I see a bright future for him. It's not about you, Rafaela. It's about my son. You want him to feel special, but he's not special. He's just another lost kid, Maria exclaimed, her voice echoing in the room. At that moment, Pedro felt a wave of sadness wash over his heart. He had never felt so alone. Mom, I just want to be loved and accepted. I'm not a thief. I just want a chance, he said, his voice choked. Pedro. Maria hesitated, but confusion and fear held her back from taking the next step. In a moment of desperation, Pedro decided he could not stay there any longer. Feeling betrayed and unsupported, he turned and left the room without looking back. He went to the room he occupied in Rafaela's house and, with trembling hands, began to write a note. The words came out quickly, as if they wanted to escape his pain. Dear Rafaela, I'm sorry. I can't stay here anymore. I need to find my way. Love, Pedro. With the note in hand, he left the house, determined to leave behind the pain and accusations. The weight of being misunderstood crushed him, and the only thing left was the hope for a better future, far from his mother's distrust. Rafaela walked through the neighborhood streets, her heart heavy and her mind racing. Worry for Pedro consumed her from within. Since he had left his home, she couldn't think of anything else. What could have happened to him? Was he safe? The questions tormented her as she looked around, trying to find clues that would lead her to the boy who had become so important in her life. She stopped at a small park where she used to see Pedro playing with his friends. Looking around, she saw kids playing ball, but none of them were Pedro. A group of teenagers was gathered in a corner, exchanging laughs and secrets. But what caught her attention the most was a young boy sitting alone on a bench, his head down. He looked as lost as Pedro was now. Approaching, Rafaela tried to connect with those kids who, like Pedro, were facing their own battles. Hey guys, she said, forcing a smile. Do you know a boy named Pedro? He's a smart and really kind kid. One of the boys, with messy hair and curious eyes, looked at her and shook his head. No, I've never heard of him, but there's another boy here who's really nice. His name is Lucas, but I don't know where he is. Rafaela nodded, a mix of hope and desperation in her eyes. If you see him, please tell him I'm looking for him. It's really important. The kids exchanged glances, realizing the seriousness in her voice. Okay, we'll let you know, said a girl with braids, a sympathetic expression on her face. Thanking them, Rafaela walked away, feeling like she might be wasting time there. She needed to go to places where Pedro used to go, where he felt comfortable. The next place on her mind was the small community library, a place that always attracted the boy, where he found refuge in the stories he dreamed of living. Upon arriving at the library, the smell of books enveloped her like a familiar hug. Rafaela walked between the shelves, observing the children sitting in corners, reading and drawing. A young librarian, with a warm smile, greeted her. Hi, Mrs. Rafaela. What brings you here? He asked. Hi, I'm looking for a boy named Pedro. Have you seen him around here recently? Her tone was pleading. Sorry, I haven't seen him, but he comes here all the time. Lately, I've noticed that many young people have been disappearing from the neighborhood. It's sad, you know, he said, his expression turning serious. Yes, I know. That's why I'm here. He was in a tough situation, and I just want him to know that I'm worried, Rafaela replied, emotion beginning to show. If you need help, you can count on me. The library is also a refuge for many young people, the librarian offered, supportive. Grateful. Rafaela left the library, her heart still heavy but determined not to give up. It was important for her to open her eyes and ears to the difficulties the neighborhood children faced. And as she walked, she began to see young people everywhere, each with their own stories, struggles, and hopes. She remembered when she met Pedro and how he talked about his dreams. I think that's our purpose, Rafaela thought, as she watched a group of young people playing volleyball on the nearby court. We all have to support each other. Approaching the group, Rafaela introduced herself. Hi, everyone. I'm Rafaela. I'm looking for a friend, Pedro. Do you know him? One of the guys, wearing a cap backward, looked at her and said, Sure. He's really cool. But I haven't seen him in a while. He's been kind of missing, you know? Everyone in the neighborhood is worried about him. Are you all here facing difficulties too? Rafaela asked, trying to understand more about what they were going through. Yeah, everyone has their problems, replied a girl with long hair and a determined expression. But we help each other. If someone disappears, we go after them. Those words touched Rafaela deeply. That's what I want to do. Find Pedro and, if possible, help others too, she thought. I can't give up on him. With that determination, Rafaela moved forward, aware that each step she took was a step towards more than just finding the boy. It was also a step towards a future where she could make a difference in the lives of many young people. Rafaela walked slowly through the park, her heart heavy with the anguish of not knowing where Pedro was. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, but the beauty of the scene couldn't warm her spirit. She remembered their last conversation, the sparkle in the boy's eyes as he talked about his dreams. Now, that sparkle seemed to have faded, and it was her fault. Maria's words still echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but feel responsible for the confusion that had settled between mother and son. As she strolled, Rafaela watched the young people playing and laughing, remembering how well Pedro fit into that environment. He always had a smile on his face, even in the toughest situations. Where are you, Pedro? She whispered to herself, feeling the weight of worry in her chest. The idea that he might be somewhere sad or unsafe made her quicken her pace, unsure of where to go. Finally, as she crossed a small lake, Rafaela spotted a boy sitting on a bench with his head down. Her heart raced. It was Pedro. He was alone, his gaze distant, lost in thoughts that seemed too heavy for his age. She approached, trying to stay calm and not scare him. Pedro, she said softly, as if calling a bird to land on her hand. The boy looked up, and his eyes were filled with sadness. What are you doing here, Rafaela? He asked, his voice barely escaping as a whisper. You shouldn't be looking for me. I don't want to go back. Rafaela sat down beside him, keeping a respectful distance but close enough for him to feel her presence. I came because I care about you. I'm so sorry for what happened. You didn't deserve to go through this, Pedro. Can you tell me how you're feeling? Pedro looked at the lake, the water's surface reflecting the sky in a broken mirror. I feel like I don't belong anywhere. My mom doesn't understand me, and you just wanted to help me, but everything got so confusing. He took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. I just wanted to be loved, Rafaela. It's so hard. Rafaela felt a deep pain upon hearing those words. It was as if each one was a knife cutting through her soul. Pedro, you are loved. I care about you, and I want you to know that you are special. No one can take that away from you. Sometimes people fail to see that, but it doesn't diminish who you are. The boy turned to her, his eyes shining with a mix of hope and doubt. Do you really think that? That I'm special? Yes, I truly believe that. Rafaela replied, placing her hand on his arm. You have a huge heart and a brilliant mind. You've proven that many times. Remember the science competition? You impressed everyone with your creativity. Pedro smiled faintly, but the sadness was still present in his gaze. But what if I fail again? What if I never find my place? We all fail, Pedro. That's part of life. What matters is how we get back up and move forward. You've faced so many difficulties and still remain strong. That's something many can't do, Rafaela said, looking into his eyes with sincerity. Remember, you're not alone. I'm here for you, and I always will be. They both fell silent for a moment, absorbing each other's words. Pedro felt the weight of his anguish begin to dissipate, even if just a little. Do you promise you won't leave me, Rafaela? That you won't give up on me? I promise, she replied, holding Pedro's hand like an anchor in the storm. Together, we can overcome this. You don't have to face these challenges alone. He smiled, a shy but genuine smile. Thank you, Rafaela. Thank you for being here. And in that moment, under the soft light of the sunset, both felt that a new hope was beginning to bloom, like a flower blossoming after a long winter. Maria sat in her small room, her heart heavy and her mind tumultuous. The silence surrounding her seemed to echo the words she had said to Pedro, as if each one carried an unbearable weight. She looked out the window, watching the movement of the neighborhood, children playing and mothers calling their kids home. Those familiar scenes now felt distant and strange. Pedro's look when she accused him of stealing was still fresh in her memory. The pain and confusion etched on his face haunted her. I just wanted to protect him, Maria murmured to herself. But the phrase sounded empty. Protect him from what? From the life I couldn't handle myself. She remembered her youth, full of dreams and hopes, but also fears and frustrations. Life had never been easy for her, and the daily struggle to support the family had shaped her worldview, making her distrustful and defensive. She got up, feeling the need to move. She walked through the house, stepping over Pedro's toys scattered on the floor, reminders of a boy who dreamed of being more than his reality allowed. What have I done to him? Maria thought, a knot forming in her throat. I pushed him away instead of supporting him. The idea of having driven her son away consumed her. Determined, Maria picked up her phone and hesitated as she looked at the screen. Rafaela's messages had been ignored, and she didn't know how to start a conversation. What would she say? How would she explain her behavior? Sorry, but I'm just a mother who cares too much. The phrase felt weak and insufficient. She took a deep breath, trying to muster courage. Finally, she sent a message to Rafaela. We need to talk. About Pedro. Where are you? The response came almost instantly. I'm at home. Come over when you can. Maria felt a knot in her stomach. What could she say to Rafaela, the businesswoman who had become a beacon of hope in Pedro's life? When she arrived at Rafaela's house, emotions flooded her. The atmosphere was warm and had an energy that contrasted with the coldness she felt inside. Rafaela welcomed her with a friendly look, but Maria noticed a concern on her face. Maria, are you okay? Pedro, he is. Rafaela began, but Maria interrupted her. I need to apologize, Rafaela. I did something terrible. I pushed him away from me and I accused him of something he didn't do. Rafaela nodded, her expression understanding yet still worried. Maria. I saw the pain in his eyes. He was so confused and alone. What you said really hurt him. I know, Maria exclaimed. Her voice choked. I was so scared of losing him, of seeing him lose himself like I let fear speak louder than love. I didn't want him to be misunderstood. I just wanted to protect him. Rafaela took a deep breath, recognizing Maria's internal struggle. Sometimes, love makes us act in ways we don't understand. But you have the chance to correct this. Pedro needs you now more than ever. Maria looked at Rafaela, gratitude and guilt mingling within her. You don't understand, Rafaela. I'm the reason he feels this way. I'm the reason he left. I don't want him to think I don't love him. I need to find him and ask for forgiveness. Then let's go. Let's find Pedro together, Rafaela said, her voice firm and encouraging. Maria felt a wave of hope, but uncertainty still haunted her. What if he doesn't want to see me? What if he doesn't forgive me? He needs you now. You are his mother. Love is stronger than fear. Let's find him and show that you are willing to change and that you care. With renewed purpose, Maria and Rafaela left the house, determination to find Pedro pulsing in their hearts. Deep down, Maria knew she needed to confront her fears and reconnect with her son, and she was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. The park was serene, with a gentle breeze caressing the leaves of the trees. Pedro and Rafaela were sitting on a bench, the tension still lingering in the air after Pedro's decision to leave Rafaela's house. They both silently stared at the ground until Maria's familiar voice echoed in the distance. She was approaching, hesitant, as if each step was a challenge. "Pedro," Maria called, the concern evident on her face. "I need to talk to you." Pedro lifted his eyes, his heart racing. He felt torn between the desire to walk away and the need to face his mother. Rafaela, sensing the weight of the moment, squeezed his hand in a gesture of support. "You don't have to do this, Maria," Rafaela said, keeping her voice calm. "Pedro is already going through a lot." "No, Rafaela," Maria replied, her voice trembling. "I need to do this. He is my son." Maria stopped in front of them, breathless. Pedro's gaze was filled with pain and confusion. He wanted to feel anger, but the truth was he was more sad than anything else. "What do you want, Mom?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady but failing. I came to apologize," Maria began, the words coming out in a whisper. "I shouldn't have accused you, I was scared." "Scared of what?" Pedro asked, his voice now quieter, almost broken. "I just wanted a chance for a better future." I know," Maria said, her eyes filled with tears. "But I couldn't see beyond my own fear. I thought you would get lost and that you would be misunderstood. I just wanted to protect you." "Protect?" Pedro laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. "You pushed me away. How is that protection?" "Pedro, please," Maria pleaded, taking a step forward. "I was a young woman full of dreams, but life hurt me so much. I didn't want you to go through what I went through. I didn't know how to deal with it." Rafaela watched the scene, feeling the depth of the pain surrounding the two of them. She decided to intervene. "Maria, you need to understand that Pedro is not you. He is strong, and he needs support, not fear." Maria nodded, her head down, as if absorbing every word. I see that now. And I am so sorry for letting my fear speak louder than my love for you, son." Pedro looked at his mother, his expression softening, although the pain was still present. "Mom, I just wanted you to trust me. I'm not a little kid. I can face challenges." "I know, Pedro," Maria replied, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I promise I will work to be a better mother. I will trust you." "Trust isn't easy," Pedro said, his voice trembling. "But I want to try. I want us to rebuild this." With a hesitant gesture, Maria extended her arms, and Pedro, after a pause, allowed himself to be enveloped in the embrace. It was a timid hug, but full of unspoken feelings. Maria cried silently, while Pedro felt a mix of relief and pain. It was a beginning, but there was still much to be undone and redone. Rafaela, standing by, smiled slightly, acknowledging the moment of reconciliation. "You both have a long way to go, but it's a path that can be walked together," she said, with an encouraging tone. Pedro pulled back a bit, looking into his mother's eyes. "Let's start slow, one day at a time. But I want you by my side. I want you to truly know me, and not just the image you have in your head." "I want that too, Pedro," Maria asserted, her voice firm but still laden with emotion. "I will get to know you, and I will support you every step of the way." The atmosphere around them began to change as the sun set, casting a golden light over the park. It was a new beginning, a new chance to connect, to understand each other, and above all, to forgive each other. The graduation ceremony was filled with emotion, with the auditorium seats occupied by family and friends, all eager to celebrate Pedro's achievement. He, now an 18-year-old young man, stood out not only for his intelligence but also for the determination he had always shown. On stage, he adjusted the microphone and looked at the audience, where Rafaela and Maria were sitting, proud smiles on their faces. "Good evening, everyone," Pedro began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today, I am here not only to celebrate my graduation in social work, but to share an important part of my story. He paused, looking at the audience, and felt his heart race as he remembered the journey that brought him here. When I was younger, my life was full of challenges. I come from a place where opportunities were scarce, and the future seemed bleak. But along the way, I met amazing people, like Rafaela, who showed me that I could dream bigger. He cast a warm glance at Rafaela, who smiled, recalling the moments when she believed in his potential. But what many don't know, Pedro continued, is that the difficulties I faced were not just mine. My mother, Maria, also fought against a system that marginalized her and prevented her from providing the best life for me. He took a deep breath, gathering the courage to address the delicate topic. Today, I want everyone to know that her struggle is the struggle of many. She is not the only one who has carried the burden of prejudice and injustice. Maria, sitting in the front row, felt the weight of her son's words. A mix of pride and guilt washed over her. She remembered the moments when she hesitated to trust Rafaela, the fear she felt in letting Pedro go, and how that protection was actually a reflection of her own insecurities. Looking at Pedro, she realized he had become a strong young man, not because of his struggles, but despite them. Today, I want to present a proposed law, Pedro announced, a sparkle in his eyes. A law aimed at protecting young people like me and my mother, who have been victims of a corrupt system. The murmurs in the audience grew, and the gazes intensified, some showing surprise, others genuine interest. This law will create support programs for adolescents in vulnerable situations, ensuring access to education, health, and, above all, opportunities. The audience was silent, absorbing every word. Rafaela, moved, held Maria's hand, who was on the verge of tears. They knew that this moment was a milestone not only in Pedro's life but also in the fight for social justice. Pedro continued, his voice echoing in the auditorium. I am not just an example of overcoming. I am proof that when we join forces, we can create real change. My mother taught me to fight, and Rafaela gave me a chance. And now, I want to be the voice for all those who haven't been as fortunate. He looked directly at Maria, who now had a beaming expression. Mom, your struggle was not in vain. We will transform this pain into hope together. The audience began to applaud, and Pedro smiled, feeling the positive energy around him. He knew he was touching the hearts of many people, not just with his story, but with his determination to make a difference. As the applause echoed, Maria stood up, emotional, and said loudly, Pedro, you are a true warrior. I am so proud of you. The audience joined in even more enthusiastic applause, and many stood up, tears in their eyes, recognizing the importance of the message. Rafaela also stood up, and together, mother and son made their way to the center of the stage. Pedro, with the glow of achievement in his eyes, knew that this was just the first step of a long journey. What had once been the weight of his experiences had transformed into a driving force, and now he was determined to continue fighting, side by side with his mother and Rafaela, for a fairer and more equal future for all.